Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. You can also check us out at the Google, Spotify, and Apple podcasts. I also do live streams at twitch.tv/ScuttleLemur. Try to keep those pretty regularly. With my work schedule, it's been a bit difficult, but nonetheless, I have been trying to get in at least one live stream a week. That's at twitch.tv/ScuttleLemur. You can also check us out at patreon.com/SonicCinema. And there you'll find exclusive discussions on specific movie franchises or certain actors or film discussions, as well as some early access reviews or just brief takes on older movies I've seen for the first time recently. That's at patreon.com/SonicCinema. We are going to be talking about In the Heights, which just came out in theaters and on HBO Max, and it is based on the Broadway musical with concept by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and it's a really entertaining movie. It's become a really interesting discussion when it comes to representation in cinema, and I'm very pleased to be joined by a fellow critic and podcaster. She is one of the co-hosts of the Latinx Lens podcast, and thank you very much for joining me, Rosa Parra.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Before we get into In the Heights, since this is your first time on the podcast, I want to give listeners a brief overview on sort of what inspired you to get into movies, what inspired you to start talking about movies, writing about movies, and then also podcasting about movies.
Yeah, so my my little backstory is a bit interesting because I just happened to just land in film criticism. It wasn't anything planned. I haven't been a big cinephile my entire life. It just something that randomly happened. I was beginning my new job at the hospital where I'm still currently working at, and I was seeking like a daily show or a podcast or something to listen to while working. And then I discovered at the time it was Collider Movie Talk, and which they had like morning shows, like 1 hour shows, or a little bit under. I think it was 30 minutes, 45-minute shows. At 10 in the morning every day, Monday through Friday. They would just talk about movies, talk about movie news, what was coming up. They would also review movies and so on and so forth. So for a good couple of months, I just started to regularly listen to them, and I was very much drawn to the chemistry between the hosts and just the passion and the dedication that these hosts talked movies, how they very much related to movies, how they genuinely loved movies. So every weekend, like every Friday or every Monday, they would talk about the new released films. And I decided that in order for me not to be lost in the conversation, I would start going to the movie theater every weekend and try to watch whatever they were talking about. So by the time it would come back to the week, I would not be as lost in the conversation. So that's how my frequent movie going experience started. And it wouldn't be until a few months later that I would start. I started just with an Instagram page, to be honest. I still have my Instagram page, and that's where it all started. Some friend of mine said, you know what, why don't you just make an Instagram page and then write 1-2 sentences reviews of what movies you've been watching and whether you recommend them or not, since I was going at the movie theater on a weekly basis. And that's how it started. And then slowly but surely, it just slowly evolved into writing about movies. And then it was Wonder Woman. So 2017. From 2017, I haven't been in the field for long. but it was Wonder Woman, the movie that certainly catapulted my career, and certainly said made me decide to do this on a daily basis and to take it more seriously. um, because there was the talk, of course, of the first ever female-led superhero movie, live-action superhero movie directed by a woman, and I didn't understand why was that such a big deal until learning that it's going to be told through the female lens, and it's going to be told it's a female superhero, something we haven't had, unfortunately, until 2017. And it was then that I realized the importance of uh, having that female lens, and not only seeing the film through my female lens, but also writing about it and giving my own interpretations about the movie and how I was receiving the movie. And from there on, that's where I started just writing movies, and that's when I get involved with Idol within their own league, which is a podcast website that is dedicated to highlighting women in the film industry, from directors to actresses, and how and focusing on that female gaze as well, and how the male gaze has certainly shaped and certainly given this interpretation and perspective of what a woman is, and what a woman should be. And then, yeah, from there on, I decided to go to school. If I was going to do this on a serious manner, I decided I had to have a good background. So in order for me to build that foundation, I had to go to school. And I'm still currently working on my film degree. As I speak, I've been working on it for I think I'm going on my second year now. I'm almost done with it though. Um, and yeah, I'm still going to school. And it was while I was doing school that I was taking a race and gender studies in American film. And for week 4, we were going to learn about Latinos, Hispanics, um, Native Americans, and then Asian Americans, and representation and contribution in film history. In just 1 week, 3 different groups in 1 week, and that's where my ideas and my wheels started to turn after reading only a page and a half of Latinos in a 500-page textbook. Only a page and a half was dedicated to Latinos and what they've done throughout film history. So disappointed and upset and a little frustrated, I just sent out a tweet asking if anybody would be interested in listening to a podcast about just highlighting Latinos and highlighting our contribution and how we also been represented in film and television. And um, luckily, I got a very supportive or overwhelming response. And lucky for me, Catherine was she was the first person to reply, suggesting a potential partnership if I ever needed anybody that she'd be more than willing to help. And actually, today is the 16th. Today is our 1 year anniversary of Latinx Lens. So it's like everything's just in a full circle. And yeah, now we're here. It's been a year. It's been an interesting and very wonderful journey with Latinx Lens. I've learned so much, so much since I started doing that podcast. And not only in terms of film history and Latinos, but about myself as well. I've come to realize some of my own biases that I had no idea about, just talking about movies and so on and so forth. So that's been an incredible experience. And it's very coincidental and funny that all of this is catapulted, and all of this has been building up to
Yeah.
what it is now in the Heights, and how that 1 page and a half in a film history textbook pretty much has not changed anything, because we're still talking about Latino representation. We're still talking about the lack of our representation and how we need to diversify that and be more inclusive to be able to accurately depict different demographics within our community, because that's a thing that I'm not entirely sure a lot of people necessarily have a grasp or a great understanding of it. But unfortunately, the term itself, Latino, it is a it is an umbrella term,
Mm-hmm.
that it's comprised of not just one or two countries. It's a lot of countries. It's more than one. We're talking about Mexico. We're talking about Central America. We're talking about the Caribbean and South America. That's several countries that you're trying to lump in together, when in reality we're not a monolith. We come in various shapes, forms, cultures, languages, backgrounds, and that's something that still today it's
Yeah.
something we're still trying to to work towards.
Yeah, and I know for me, somebody who I will admit it's like I haven't necessarily thought about too much. I've thought more about representation as the discussion has gone on over the past few years, but the fact that it really has been more in the past few years than like in the 20 plus years that I've been working as that I've been writing about film, that I've been talking about film, and it's one of those things where I do, you mentioned the fact that Latinos a umbrella term meaning so many things, so many different countries. That's kind of, and I'll admit it's like I didn't really think about that in terms of just how limiting that, to a certain extent, that specific phrase, that specific idea could be in terms of discussing representation in film. And it's one of those things where it's like there are filmmakers, there are Latino filmmakers that I love. The Three Amigos. I love film actors like Salma Hayek and Gal Garcia. I sorry, I can't remember. I can't pronounce.
Yeah,
his name.
Gael Garcia Bernal.
Yeah, if I don't have his name in front of me, it's like it's hard to remember what the pronunciation is. I apologize. But the fact is, it's like I never really thought, it's like I certainly have tried to, I've certainly somebody who has always tried to expand my horizons as far as how I think about not just how I think about different cultures and how I experience different cultures and different perspectives in film, because that's something that I've been passionate about for over 20 years. But it's I will admit it's been a learning perspective, and I know your perspective and other perspectives, because I think I first connected with you when you were in their own league, and
Right.
and that was I've become familiar with so many more female filmmakers because of really because of people like you, and in their own league really talking about those filmmakers, and then with Latinx Lens and following you as you're talking, as you've started to really grow into talking about that larger representation, being able to expand my horizons in terms of my understanding of why this type of representation matters. I mean, I've always felt like representation matters. I just didn't really think about what exactly that means. And I mean, I think I'm like a lot of, I think I'm like a lot of middle-aged white guys who've basically been represented since the silent era in Hollywood, where it's like, I don't think, there was a time where I maybe didn't think about as much, or as seriously, I should say, as much as I should have. And it's been great to be able to say, it's been rewarding to be able to start to think about it more.
Yes, absolutely. And it's even a learning process to me, because whatever little representation we've had as Latinos, it's been predominantly me. It's been that Mexican American perspective, that Chicano perspective from East LA. So we have movies like Stand and Deliver and Suit and Blood In and Blood Out, American Me. So certainly my demographic has been represented quite. I mean, not enough, of course, in terms of representation, but whatever little representation we have had, it has been the Mexican American experience. And that's another thing, because a lot of people feel, and of course, it's not people's fault. Watching movie and television, you do unconsciously develop this preconceived notion of certain demographics, of certain groups, and to some extent that a lot of people find surprising, but particularly if you don't travel a lot. They would find surprising that, yes, they are Latinos all across the country. Unfortunately, only the ones that are being depicted are either here in Southern California or New York, or just the bigger, well-known cities. But if you go to Arizona, you go to New Mexico, you go to Texas. Texas only has had, well, thanks to Robert Rodriguez, there's been a little bit more help there. But I mean, Selena, who's a Tejana. But other than that, I don't think, like, on a bigger, wider picture, there hasn't been that much representation. And this is just the Mexican American experience. Which is why having something like In the Heights that's representing predominantly a Caribbean perspective, like from Dominicans and Puerto Ricans and Cubans, but not necessarily that they're there, but it's the U.S. experience of the Latinos that's also very much missing and reminiscent of in Hollywood. Because yes, we do have a lot of the films from the Three Amigos, like Iñárritu and Del Toro and Cuarón, and some of their films are based in Mexico, but I can't, for obvious reasons, there is no way that I can relate as much to a movie like Y Tu Mamá También or Amores Perros like I would with The Stand and Deliver and probably American Me or of some sorts, because the Latino US experience is completely different from either being in Mexico or being in your motherland, pretty much. So that also, it's an interesting perspective that needs to be explored a little deeper. Pero yeah, representation, and I'm just speaking out loud, and I'm speaking just nationalities, pretty much. I personally think representation goes farther than that. I think in terms of within the Heights, we've been discussing it with colorism, but in my opinion, I think, believe it or not, there is Native Americans in a lot of these Latino countries. So that perspective is also an interesting one to look into. There's Asians in a lot of Latin American countries as well. So it's just these little far more subgroups that are further in need of representation. And on top of that, I think diversity. We're talking about diversity. I think sizeism, being, of course, a little bit thicker, or your height, or your style of hair, disability, LGBTQ representation. It just goes to so many different horizons that all those little prospects do exist in our community as well, but aren't necessarily represented as much.
What would you say makes for, I mean, obviously this is kind of a subjective term. It kind of depends on your world experience. It kind of depends on your personal perspective on life. What would you consider successful representation in movies?
That's a very interesting question, because it's gonna and it's gonna be a very complex answer, because to me, successful representation is where, if not all, but a good majority of people have seen themselves represented in film, more than once. And I think I was being interviewed for something very similar in terms of Latino representation. And this is something I learned while doing Latinx Lens. I was watching the documentary of Danny Trejo, and he was asked what was his thoughts, what was his feeling about um, always constantly being depicted as the inmate, as the bad guy, as the cholo, as the gang member. And his answer was, I am the gang member. I have been in prison. I have been an inmate. So that is me. And I think at that moment I realized, okay, we're always talking about stereotypes, and we're always grouping and labeling stereotypes as either gang members or inmates or maids, criminals, narcos, or construction workers, but they do exist within our Latino community. So I think a successful type of representation is depicting not only those type of characters, but other characters too. Because within our community also, we have astronauts, we have civil rights activists, we have musicians, we have artists, we have medical professionals. I mean, I'm a laboratory scientist. Where's my story? And there's far more. We have athletes. There's so many more professions that Latinos are currently in, that those stories have not been told. We have, of course, we have La Bamba and we have Selena, but we have far more musicians than that. Yeah. We have, I mean, sports films. Come on, we have a lot of athletes. Come on, we have Lionel Messi, we have Pele. I mean, where are those stories? We do have documentaries. I watched the Pele documentary and the Maradona one, but where are the films? Yeah. That are not that. We have astronauts too. We have writers like novelists and that are in literature and poets. We have a lot. And those are, I think, the stories that we should also be exploring, not just limiting it to just being and I don't actually consider them negative representation when it comes to the mates or the criminals or anything like that, because they do exist. I grew up in East LA. That what you see in American Me, what you see in Blood In and Blood Out, I grew up surrounded by that. It is actually depicted. It's not, to me, it's not a stereotype. It was my childhood. So it's just going outside of that. I think something like Stand and Deliver certainly is something that also takes place in East LA. You do have your gang member representation, but you do have these group of students who are trying to literally pass calculus in the high school years. And because of their complexions, because of their Spanish surnames, because they're Chicanos, they're Mexican Americans, they are already assumed, they're looked upon as less and not smart enough to actually pass calculus. And I kid you not, when I was taking calculus in college, I would watch Stand and Deliver like 4 to 5 times a week, just for motivation purposes. And it worked. I passed. It worked. But stories like that, I mean, we have more than one Jaime Escalante. I'm pretty sure we have professors that have done far more, and not just in East LA, but everywhere else. I mean, Dolores Huerta or Cesar Chavez. I know we have a Cesar Chavez film that was directed by Diego Luna. Not too great, but I'm sure we can do far more. And there's certainly, and also like something that like Hustlers, for instance, that was starring Jennifer Lopez. And whether you think the profession is morally right or not, that's independently up to the viewer. But these characters were complex. They were layered. And I think that's also another thing that's missing within either our gang films or our inmates or the narcos or the maids or anything like that. They're so one-dimensional and so reduced that oftentimes the lack of complexity adds probably to the negative image that a lot of people are taking away from these characters, and it's a various amount of elements that I think that need to be incorporated to have successful representation. But know that Latinos are not only Mexicans, that they don't only live in East LA or New York, they live across the country. And just know that, yeah, we all come in different shades, shapes, forms, and languages. And it's just far more than what we've seen in film. And that's something that I mean, advocating for, being
Yeah.
vocal about it, having these conversations certainly help. But I think that's definitely something I'm trying to do with the podcast.
Yeah.
Trying to seek out the smaller films, the films that
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily get the promotions. And I'm aware in a very privileged position where I'm just doing this for free. I'm not getting paid for it. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that pressure from bigger outlets or anybody behind my head telling me, you need to review this, you need to do this because we need the clicks and we need anything. And I think that's certainly something that's advantageous in our end to being a freelancer and doing our own thing our own way.
Mm-hmm. No,
Because uh-huh.
no, go ahead.
Oh no! I was just gonna say because we also like put out tweets asking like up and comer Latino directors if they want to email us their films
Mm-hmm.
that still have not found distributors or short films or anything like that. That also we try to bring a little bit of attention to. So whatever we can do to bring more eyes or any attention to it, we were trying our best as well.
Who are some before we get into In the Heights? Who are some
Mm-hmm.
filmmakers other than the ones that most people know of that you've really connected with their work?
Yes. Well, of course, everybody knows the Three Amigos. I have the unpopular opinion that Alejandro González Iñárritu is my favorite out of the three. I know, I'm sorry, but I think I prefer him over Del Toro and Cuarón, but it's just because out of the three, he's most of the socialist
Mm-hmm.
out of the three, and his stories, his vision, and his realism approach to everything is something that very much connects with me. I don't mind losing myself in Del Toro's like imagination. I would love that. I enjoy that every now and then. And Cuaron is perhaps the most versatile out of the three in terms of filmography. He certainly has a diverse set of films. He has the most diverse out of the three. But I mean, I think what Robert Rodriguez has done, and of course everybody knows him, certainly something that it's worth mentioning because he was one of the first U.S. born Latinos to make it into Hollywood and not necessarily allow himself to be puppeteered by the Hollywood studios. He certainly wanted his creative control of his films, and still ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the very first directors to depict Latinos as just Latinos, not necessarily be pondering our cultural background or identity in films, just like we see in Spy Kids and
Yeah.
we see in We Can Be Heroes. It's just normalized. So that's something very interesting. Alita Battle Angel as well. I think for me, we just recently did an episode on Patricia Cardoso. She's a Colombian filmmaker. She did Real Women Have Curves, a smaller film. I think the female filmmakers, which unfortunately there's not that many Latinas. I'm sad to report. But Patricia Cardoso is one of them. Patricia Regan is the other one. Her films are certainly something that have connected with me a lot. Both of them certainly tell very female-centric narratives, and of course, something that I'm most likely going to connect to. And who else am I thinking of here? Directors. I mean, Edward James Olmos is a director, but we only covered him as an actor. Um, I think. Let me see. I think Pablo Larraín. I think he's a Chilean filmmaker. He's the one that's currently directing Spencer. and he did Jackie, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Let me double check on this. Do not quote me. I just want to make sure I'm getting the names right and the films right. Pablo Larraín, yes, he's Chilean. Yes, Jackie, and he's currently doing Spencer. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some of his films are certainly interesting to see. And then, of course, we do know of Andy Muschietti, who's an Argentinian film. He did the It films. Who else? I'm trying to think. I mean, Aurora Guerrero, she directed Mosquita y Marie, which is currently streaming on Netflix. And that was much of a smaller film, but it looks into two Chicanas, two Mexican American. It's a coming of age story about two girls who just developed this friendship that might end up developing into something more. We don't know. You'll have to watch the movie to find out. But it takes place in an area here in Southern California, in a city that isn't necessarily depicted in film a lot, which is Huntington Park, which is like it's like a good 20, 15-minute drive. I think it's either east or west of East LA. So it's not that far from East LA. And that was certainly an interesting movie that we got the opportunity to talk about also in our podcast. But yeah, Aurora Guerrero, she's certainly another director that I recommend keeping an eye out for.
Okay. There are certainly some good there are certainly some good recommendations. I was also going to I was thinking about Alexis Gambis and his film Son of Monarchs, which played Sundance, and I saw it for the Atlanta Film Festival earlier this year, and it's really a fascinating movie, and it's one of those movies. It's about a scientist who goes home for because of the death of a family member, and it really has a profound impact on him. And I actually got a chance to interview Gambis for my coverage of the Atlanta Film Festival, and you can find that review and that interview on Sonic Cinema. And I would definitely recommend that as one to check out. I think it's a fascinating drama, and I think it's one that is really I think it's one that can unexpectedly connect with people as well.
I agree. It was my second favorite film of Sundance, Son of Monarchs. And I didn't get the chance to talk to Alexis Gambis. But yes, he's also another director to look out for. Tenoch Huerta is certainly slowly but surely becoming one of my favorite currently working actors at the moment. And I absolutely loved Son of Monarchs. I remember watching it for the first time, and I tweeted that I had seen a movie that had blown my entire existence away. And that was this film. I had never seen a scientist depicted in film like this one, and I could not relate to it more on a professional level, on a cultural level, and on so many levels. Being here in the United States and just his life going back and forth to Mexico and living in the US as well. That was certainly something. And of course, they touch upon these social political narratives, and it's visually gorgeous, and how they utilize the monarch butterflies to just not only to symbolize change and perhaps like this metamorphosis, but also as it's culturally it's also an important cultural element in Mexico. I think it is said that every time the monarch butterfly arrives in Mexico, that's when it's most likely going to be start the Day of the Dead. So there's this just cultural connection amongst everything that's just gorgeous and beautiful. And I need to watch it one more time because it's certainly in contention of being one of my favorites. Hopefully it gets distributed this year. I've been raving about that film and they keep telling me, oh, just wait, you'll hear some news soon, and if it does, it's certainly going to be one of my favorites of the year.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about In the Heights, which, just like I said earlier, came out in theaters and HBO Max. I unfortunately, because of a time crunch with my schedule, I've been unable to see it in theaters, but I did get a chance to see it in HBO Max this week. I know you've seen it considerably more times than me. I think you're up to, how many times are you up to on seeing this movie so far?
As of today, it's been 9 times.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie that many times that was a current movie. And this is just a joyous film. It really is. It is from the director of Crazy Rich Asians. He did at least one of the Step Up movies, I think. He also done G.I. Joe Retaliation. He's also done Now You See Me Too. He is. This is a film about the story told by the main character Usnavi of Washington Heights, and in particular 3 days in Washington Heights before a blackout occurs. And one of the things that interested me in watching the movie is that there are certainly story elements, there are certainly narrative threads that we follow, but it's not really an overlying big epic arc. It's just a lot of very small controlled arcs, and just to really bring to life the area of Washington Heights in New York. And that's one of the things that I really liked about it, is that it really doesn't feel like it's this big sprawling film, even though it's got some really fantastic and kind of epic dance sequences in it. But it's very down to earth and it's very personal, and that's one of the things I really liked about it. Just to start the ball rolling on discussing it.
Yes. I don't even know where to start. and it's not because I know how I feel about the movie. I mean, I've seen it 9 times. It's obviously a rewatchable film. I plan to watch it once more, at least in the theaters, and then I think that's where I'll limit myself. And it's become very interesting because of the everything that's been surrounding it, and this was before it started, like, with the box office, and I think that's the box office numbers and how it performed, and that's I think that something that very much intrigued me, because a lot of people were they overestimated how much it was going to do, and it opened very much lower than they expected, and now there's all these talks about how it's underperforming and how it's a flop and blah blah blah. Independently of the controversies and everything that's been surrounding it, as I've seen this film, it's been growing and growing and growing and growing on me. And as I continue to watch it, I continue to watch it and watch it and watch it and watch it again. It's come to the point where it continues to climb up my favorites of the year, for different reasons. I initially wasn't in love with the movie. If you listen to our review, you can see why. You can listen to why I wasn't in love with it at the time. But now that I've had the opportunity to rewatch it and nitpick certain points, and had the chance to just sit with it, because this is not the movie that it has. The narrative is perhaps the weakest part of the movie, if I'm being honest. And if you're going into this film seeking a very strong narrative and seeking, like you were saying, perhaps a main focus story you're not going to get that. They do give that impression that the story of Usnavi, well, he's certainly the main character. He's the one
Yeah.
narrating everything that's going on. And we start with him and then we end the movie with him. So in that sense, yes. But believe it or not, I think he, as much as he is one of the protagonists, there's other characters that do take up the same amount of screen time as he does, and I understand how people can feel like it's a bit um, disjointed in a way, because
Mm-hmm.
that's how I felt at first. At first, I was like, "This is too convoluted. You're trying to handle too many storylines, too many subplots. Some of them that don't even have any resolution. So what's going on?" Um, but like you said, this is literally just a movie about a community. And that, I think that's the main storyline here. It's the
Yeah.
community of Washington Heights. And these people just happen to live there. They just happen to reside there. Yes, we go alongside them, and there's dreams and their struggles and everything they experience. But for people seeking a far more complex and deeper narrative in a musical, you're not going to get that here. This is far more, it's a much more lighter film, lighter
Yeah.
in terms of the heaviness, in terms of challenges and the circumstances that these characters face. Um, and the more I watch it, I've come to realize that, yes, some of these characters may seem like they're one layered, very
Mm-hmm.
not too complex or stretched out a lot. There were a few times, particularly in the first viewing, when I was with one character and then it took me like 20-30 minutes to see that character again in the film. And then you're like, oh my God, okay, there's this person again. But you know what? As it's just been growing on me, and it's just a movie that it's a celebration of cultures, a celebration of our own heritage, celebration of dreams. It's one of the very few Latino films that does not involve violence or guns
Yeah.
or any trauma porn that we're so accustomed to watching. And I think I when I was being interviewed for Teen Vogue, I said that it was very refreshing to not see a Latino antagonist in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And people replied, "Well, Mr. Softy is the antagonist. That's just that the antagonist we have in this film, a
Yeah.
damn ice cream dude." Who's in his truck taking away the customers
Yeah.
of the Piragua guy. That's as bad as we get, and that was so refreshing to watch.
Mm-hmm.
That it was just wow. I was blown away by that because it's rare. It's rare. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I was telling you earlier, where we're so accustomed to seeing the criminals and the inmates and the gangs, that seeing something like this might be shocking at first. But now that I've seen it multiple times, it's been settling in, and I've been able to marinate in it, and it's lovely. The songs are gorgeous, everything, the choreography, everything, and the storylines. I mean, everything. I love everything. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
where you want to go next, but
Well,
it's just I love it.
yeah, and I think that's one of those things where if that's honestly the best type of movie to be able to watch is the type of movie where even if you don't necessarily love it the first time, the more you see it, the more it resonates with you, the more it connects with
Mm-hmm.
you. And I've certainly had plenty of experiences with that over the years. But yeah, this is and this is a movie that like it just is, like you said, it's very light. And I mean, there are issues of prejudice, of systemic oppression, of the
Mm-hmm.
immigration system, and financial struggles that ultimately play a part in the fates of a lot of these characters. But ultimately, that's not necessarily what this movie is about. It's about, like you said, it's about dreams, and it's also about the a generation of dreamers whose parents brought them to this country or who came to this country for another life. And one of the things that really connected with me personally about it is I remember that experience. I mean, I certainly don't have the same experience the characters have in the movie, but I remember when my parents moved us down to Georgia 30 plus years ago. And it was because of the fact that they felt like there were opportunities in that move that I wouldn't have necessarily gotten in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, and that's something that for a time I wrestled with. And it was over, as I grew up, as I became a teenager, as I started to have some of those experiences that they were hoping that I would have, it's like that pain kind of went away, but also it also brought up another issue, which I think the movie really handles very well in the dynamic between Nina and Kevin, the Jimmy Smits character, and that is the idea of living your life versus living the life that your parents want for you.
Yeah.
And that is a tough dynamic to wrestle with. If at times, I mean, I definitely struggled with in my 20s, and it wasn't until I realized that it's like, you know what? I mean, I've accomplished a lot of things. I mean, I certainly hadn't accomplished a lot of the things that they had by the time I was certain ages and stuff like that, but I had also built a certain life for myself in terms of friends, in terms of loved ones, in terms of people, things that I enjoyed doing, in terms of things that I enjoyed to talk about, and things I was passionate about. And so I connected with, in this film, I connected with the the struggle that Nina is feeling when her father is, he's so set on her going to college and having that experience that he didn't have, but she doesn't necessarily want it. And then when she realizes, well, I can still do that and have it mean something that's passionate to me. And that was honestly, like, that was the most compelling arc in the movie for me. I mean, I enjoyed the rest of the movie. I enjoyed the rest of the characters, but at the same time, it's like that is the one that really emotionally connected with me. And it was fascinating to see the way it played out in the songs and in the narrative as as it exists in the film.
Yes. I completely agree. I think Nina's story connects with a lot of us, particularly those of us who are uh, the children, in our case, of either immigrants or people who just recently moved here, whether legally or illegally, however you wish.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, yeah, the being the children of immigrants certainly does come with a load of responsibilities. You do have to figure what you want to do or what dreams you want to live. You want to, like you said, you want to live your own, so you want to live your parents' dreams, and that's certainly a struggle that a lot of us go through. In addition to not being able to afford. Education is so
Yeah.
expensive, and that aspect also was certainly an interesting one to explore. And ultimately, I think what got me the most, and Nina and Kevin certainly were one of my favorite storylines here, was the moment when she decides what she wants to do, and
Mm-hmm.
then he leans back and he says, well, this is the moment you do better than me.
Mm-hmm.
And that quote in that moment was so touching and so moving, because as a parent, and that's the thing, in that scenario, I can relate as a mother, but I can also relate as the daughter of immigrants. That's what I'm always telling my kids. I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be better than me.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to do more than what I'm doing now. I want you to be more. I want you to dream as big as you can. And that moment was just very touching, and I was like, wow, this is extraordinary. He comes to the US. He literally builds his own business. He literally has to sell it off for his daughter's education. He loses the business eventually, and when she decides to select her own career and everything, he's like, wow, this is where you do better than me. And I was like, oh my god. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah. And I mean, it really just taps into that moment that we all hope that we have with our parents, where we feel a sense of validation from them about the choices that we've made. And that's something that's universal. It doesn't matter what your background is. It's like if you've ever been fortunate enough to have that experience, it means something when you see it represented on screen. And and Usnavi is definitely the main character, and it's like his sort of love story with Vanessa, and that is, that's I guess that's kind of the sort of the backbone of the movie from a narrative standpoint. It's like, because you always kind of have to have a certain you always kind of have to have a romance at the beginning, at the center of a musical, I guess, to a certain extent. But at the same time, it's like, honestly, you have the one with Benny and Nina, and honestly, with Sonny, Usnavi's cousin, it's like that's the most interesting dynamic there, is with Usnavi and Sonny, not so much with Usnavi and Vanessa. But the relationship between Benny and Nina is, and there are wonderful songs in this movie that really, between them, that really charts that evolution. And it's just beautiful. It's in the way that they're shot. It's magical, and I love that. In the grand scheme of things, I mean, the framing device of Usnavi telling the kids the story of Washington Heights, it ultimately doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the grand scheme of things when you get to the end. But I love the fact that it sets this movie kind of up as a fable, and there's a sense of escapism to this movie, which I feel like, to a certain extent, a lot of movie musicals sort of lose sight from, because of the fact that it's like, to a certain extent, some of them are, something like Les Mis, which is really well put together, but it's also very depressing and dark. Phantom of the Opera was kind of the same way. It's like, and I mean, even Rent, which I love, it's like that was... There wasn't a lot of artificiality to that movie. It was very like, you felt like these characters might be actually in New York singing this song. And it's like, that's not to say there's not a sense of reality to In the Heights. It is. It's just, it's a sense of reality within the context of that film that's not trying to reflect an actual reality. And I think that is important for movie musicals to sort of remember at times.
Yes, it does have like this fantastical aspect to it. Particularly there's some little tiny bits and pieces, like a little animation that's incorporated throughout. And then I understand a lot of people. I've heard this a lot about him talking to the kids and how that wasn't necessarily intricate to the story. I actually liked it, to be honest, because first of all, I hadn't seen the musical. I hadn't seen the play. So I was thinking that I was literally thinking oh my God, we're about to, can I spoil this or no? I don't know.
I mean, we can if you want to, but we can put a spoiler alert on here. That's fine.
Are you sure? I don't want you to lose any.
No, that's fine.
Cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, because I had not seen the actual Broadway play. I hadn't seen the play at all. I wasn't sure how this was gonna end. I genuinely thought he was in Dominican Republic when all of this was going on.
Right.
So my expectations were, okay, well, he is leaving. There's no way he's gonna stay. So the ending certainly did surprise me a bit. I was not expecting that. And then another part is, and I think, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure if this is a Lin thing, but there's something about legacy and the importance of storytelling, that he does the same thing with Hamilton, and like who dies and who tells your story, and then and all that good stuff. And it's certainly sprinkled here, especially with your newer generation, the one that's growing up. And I find it very interesting, particularly when he starts talking to them and he tells them, Washington Heights, say it so you won't forget it. So our legacy continues going on. It continues. And also incorporated in that is one of my personal favorite scenes is when they list all these Latinas, all these important Latinas in history and in film, civil activists. We have Frida Kahlo. You have Celia Cruz, a famous musician from Cuba. And you have Dolores Huerta. So the list of the Latinas, that was another one of my favorite parts in the movie, which again, it's pretty much reiterating. I can't talk. To particularly the two little girls, that certainly filled my heart because now they know who these women are. Yeah. Now they have somebody to look up to, and that little fist bump at the end between those two girls was just. Again, it was those little details that were very significant to me. And when my girls watched the movie and the list was going on, I'm like, you need to check out who these women are, what they've done. And I think Rita Moreno is in there too. Rita Moreno and Celia Cruz and Frida Kahlo and Isabel and Sandra Cisneros, a famous author who wrote The House on Mango Street. So yeah, these famous Latinas that now these girls have to look up to. And again, it's the legacy that Latinos continue to live. So that aspect, I personally did like it. It was quite important to me. Perhaps because I was a bit surprised by the ending. I was not expecting that. But for what it stands for, the importance of storytelling and that legacy and having your children, now that he's been telling the story, I'm pretty sure his daughter, I hope, continues to tell the story and just keeps it going on to her kids and then grandkids and so on and so forth. So I didn't mind it, but I understand why a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be fond of it.
Yeah, ultimately, I like the I like the framing device as well for the reason I mentioned earlier. That sort of sets up the movie as a fable, something that's more a little bit more fantasy. But also, I do actually, and here's where I don't necessarily mind spoiling the ending to it, because of the fact that I think that is sort of the counter of the end of Usnavi's arc, where he realizes that he doesn't need to go to the Dominican Republic to reopen up his father's legacy, and he wants to continue his own. I think that is it's very much in piece with Nina's arc as well, where it's like they basically both come to these realizations of what they want their legacies to be and what the importance of that legacy is. And that's one of the reasons why I do think that's an important part of it, because of the fact that it does set up that idea at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing I very much enjoyed about the movie. As uplifting and optimistic as it can be, it doesn't necessarily have like the nicely tied bow and happily ever after for all of the characters. Like the salon ladies, they were literally gentrified out of there. They couldn't afford to pay rent anymore, so they did have to move. They had to leave. Similar thing with Nina. Nina ends up leaving as well. She comes home to, I guess, mentally sort her things out and figure out what she wants to do, and eventually leaves again. And it's this. I love, like, on a macroscopic level, on the bigger lens, how a lot of us, and there's different perspectives, all of us have different dreams, all of us have different views, experiences, and how, for a lot of them, for the main characters, that is, staying in Washington Heights was looked upon as either not being good enough for you to advance your career, which is why we have the character of Vanessa wanting to move uptown, because she feels doing that her career can blossom somehow. And of course, Nina also, she comes back, but eventually leaves again. And then we have Usnavi, who eventually wants to leave back to the Dominican Republic. And how that itself stands and symbolizes, for everybody, it's going to be different. For some people, if you stay here, if you don't get out, particularly with the character of Nina, how her song unfolds, then you're stuck. But if you do get out, there's this interesting dichotomy that they explore in the movie. That if you do get out, like Nina says, I feel like I'm betraying my people, that I'm betraying my community by going somewhere else and not being with you guys. So it's very an interesting concept that they are exploring here, and eventually some people do end up leaving, others stay. But I love how they were able to have a diverse group of characters with their respective dreams and their respective views on either the community and how to hopefully accomplish those dreams.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about the idea of representation in this movie, which, needless to say, this past week has seen a bit of an uproar with regards to a lot of criticisms, and I've been basically wanting to stand back, and read a lot of other people's thoughts and perspectives on the issue, and with regards to the colorism, as you mentioned earlier, in particular with regards to the Afro-Latinx community in it. And one of the things that has been mentioned is the lack of it, and it's very light-skinned, very fair-skinned characters throughout the film, and this is a to a certain extent, I feel like this conversation is sort of above my grade as far as being able to be a part of it. But I'm wondering, sort of, I've been following you on Twitter, and sort of how, as you've been taking things in, as well as you've been taking in different perspectives as well. And I just wanted to kind of talk, I kind of wanted to give you a chance to give your thoughts on the representation or lack thereof in this movie.
Yes. I can only speak as a brown Chicana from East LA. I have never been to Washington Heights, so I cannot either confirm or deny of how it looks, of its residents, and how, if it's actually being accurately depicted in this film. I cannot deny or confirm any of that because I've never been there, and that would be quite disingenuous from my end. What I can say, though, is if I'm going my tweets pretty much say that I am aware of the issue of colorism within the Latino community. I'm brown, a little bit darker brown skin. I am not white passing whatsoever. You look at me and you either see an indigenous woman or a Mexican woman. And from stereotypical, of course. And I can only speak from, believe it or not, from my privilege, because I can't not speak on behalf of the Afro Latinos because I'm not a member of the community. So therefore, it would be, again, disingenuous from my end. But I can say that as a brown Chicana, it's been a learning process. It's been a learning process to have these conversations in terms of colorism and racism. And it's I can say that colorism does exist in the Latino community. I grew up in a very predominantly Mexican household. My mother was very much light skinned, like white passing. She had green eyes, but she was born in Mexico. My father was not. Was not light skinned, which is where I get my brownness from. And I did experience microaggressions because of my skin tone when I was younger. I was called prietita, or like little darker. I don't even know how to translate that into English. So I can attest that there is colorism issues in the Latino community. And even though I am brown, I do acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do. In terms of representation, in terms of on screen, and how it's no secret. It's no secret that Hollywood tends to prefer lighter skinned Latinos. I mean, look at Gael Garcia Bernal. Homeboy has green eyes. He's light. Diego Luna, also. Even if you look at the Three Amigos, I think the darker one out of the three is Iñárritu. Guillermo del Toro, also kind of blonde, green eyes. Cuarón, also light skin. So there is a trend that lighter skinned Latinos tend to be, I mean, more have more opportunities. So I'm glad that these conversations are happening. In regards to the apologies that happen, if they've been posted or not, I don't feel I'm in a position. I also feel like there should be, I feel a bit restricted in a sense that I don't want to speak on behalf of a community I'm not a part of in terms of the Afro Latinos. So in that case, I have nothing to say about the apologies that were being handed out by both Lin-Manuel Miranda and Rita Moreno. What I will say is the tweet I posted out earlier, we have a lot of learning and teaching to do. And I'm a strong believer of, I'm very open to talking about people who are very who are either have thoughts or ideas opposed to mine or different from mine. I'm very open to having conversations like that, but I'm afraid that I'm not necessarily fond of the quick judgment and how we're so quick to judging people without getting context as to either tweets or interpreting what's being displayed in the film or what people are saying, like the Rita Moreno case. I am a big believer in learning and growing. Teacher and talk. Let's have these conversations and why they're important to have them, because that's the only way we're going to learn and we're going to grow, and it's the only way for progress. It's a learning and growing experience, and the only way we learn is by teaching others. So I'm a big believer in that. And again, I very much support this having these conversations and having a more that's also a part of having successful representation on screen. Again, going back to the beginning of the podcast, if you can see yourself at least more than once in a movie, then we're slowly getting there, and it's just the progress. It's sadly a slow one, but it's something we're working towards, and we still have a lot of work to do. But yeah, and that I know probably not a lot of help in terms of these conversations, just because I do feel like in some instances, I don't think it's my place to say or demand or say anything or to claim to be an ally to anybody, just because to me actions speak louder than words.
Mm-hmm.
And my form of allyship is amplifying these voices, amplifying and supporting fellow Afro Latinas who are being very vocal about this, and rightfully so, because we do
Mm-hmm.
need to have these conversations, and representation does matter.
Yeah, I do think the conversation is certainly the most important first step, and especially just being able to listen to other people with their grievances, people with their thoughts and feelings on it. And I mean, not um, trying to just not trying to silence them, but allowing them to speak their mind and to be able to take it in uh, as much without judgment as we can. And I think that
Right.
that's the most important thing. I mean, that's part of the reason why it's like I certainly, like I said, I'm certainly not somebody who can, who can speak intelligently on these. And I mean, I'm learning too, and it's like I'm as I watch these movies, as I listen to people online talk about these movies, it's like I'm learning as much as everybody else, and that's one of the things that I want to do. It's like, because if it makes me a better film watcher, but also if it makes me a better person to be able to understand where these people are coming from, and to understand where, and to try to um, amplify amplify these voices as much as I can to
Mm-hmm.
get their thoughts and feelings heard. I mean, that's ultimately the most important thing. I mean, you and I both have platforms in which we can amplify voices that
Yeah.
we are we want to be able to amplify so that they get heard in the same way that we get heard. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that, it's like with Lin-Manuel Miranda, it's like, as a I've also been a creative artist over the years, and I mean, you basically create from your own experiences, and that, could have been more his experience. And it's like, it's not to say that it's not to say, and art is never created within, is always created within the bubble of the artist. It's like, you can try to be as inclusive as possible when you make it, but at the same time, it's like, it's going to be as much about your personal life experiences uh, than it is in than not. And I think that's one of those things. And that's one of the things that I want to say about it doesn't necessarily, to a certain extent, it doesn't I wouldn't necessarily say it diminishes the art that Lin-Manuel Miranda created, because he is responsible for some wonderful songs in this and Hamilton. He's responsible for some really fascinating discussions on topics that interested him, whether it's in the Heights or Hamilton. And I think he does. I think he does that successfully, even if there's still flaws that can be seen within the way those are presented.
Yeah, sometimes from my end, I think the best thing I can do, um, because again, it's just been recently, and again, doing this podcast, doing my podcast, and being on Twitter has taught me a lot as well. And in terms of biases that I wasn't aware of, or just knee jerk reactions that I would immediately have without necessarily thinking about it. And it's been a learning process. It's been a learning experience that um, that I'm sure I still have a lot, a lot to learn. And thankfully, I do have friends and people I do follow on Twitter who are very knowledgeable, and they're intellectuals in terms of representation. And I think there's times that the best thing that I can do is just shut up and listen to them and see what they have to say, learn, amplify their voices, and just be there and support them, however we wish to do that, either amplifying either articles or tweets, or just passing along the information, because that does help a lot. In terms, and one example that I'm going to be completely honest with you was Latinos winning Oscars. I was always I was always saying that Rita Moreno was the only woman in the history of the Academy Award, the only Latina to win an Academy Award, until it was brought to my attention that Lupita Nyong'o is Mexican. I wasn't aware of that. I wasn't aware that she was Mexican. And I mean, it's good to know now there's two Latinas in the history of the Academy Awards. But again, it's a learning process.
Yeah.
And it's something that we can, only thing we can do, me as one of the privileged Latinas who does see herself on screen a little bit more often than my fellow Afro Latinos, all I can do is help and speak up and help amplify their voices and do something about it, because my silence is certainly, unfortunately, adding to the oppression and the continuous exclusion of that representation. So yeah, it's I can see how it could be a bit difficult or uncomfortable to have these conversations, but at the end of the day, we need to have them. Otherwise, we're not going to go anywhere. If we don't have these conversations, there's going to be no progress. So from my end, I listen, I help, I amplify, and I do my best to learn and just do my part. And at times, like I said, just staying quiet and letting and learning and just grasping everything. And I'm never ever, and I'm very well aware of that, I'm never going to know what it's like to be a Black person in this country. I know what it is to be a brown one, not a Black one. However, it does not necessarily mean I have to be desensitized of their experience just because I don't know what it's like. All these stories, everything we've heard in the news or through friends or anything like that, we just have to support, try to do our part, and just be an ally, and just be in solidarity with them, and do our end and do our part to try to amplify their voices, their stories, because all of our stories matter.
Yeah. And even if In the Heights is lacking in full representation of Latinos, I mean, ultimately what this movie does successfully, for me at least, and I would hope for others, other middle-aged white guys like me, is that it represents a way of looking at the Latino community beyond the stereotypes that a lot of that we have been inundated. That we've basically had our entire lives in terms of Latino characters, Mexican characters, and just in general, sort of the types of characters that Danny Trejo's played over the years, and that's where a movie like In the Heights, and you mentioned Spy Kids, that's an excellent example, and it's one that I love that movie when it came out 20 years ago, and it's hard to believe it's 20 years, but the thing is, it's like that type of it, even if it's not, even if it's lacking in full representation of the community, I think it does, at least from my outsider's perspective, still represent the community well, because of the fact that it gives us characters that we can relate to, characters that we can empathize with, but ultimately characters that are very much still of their community, rather than just, you know, transmuting their stories to like a white lifestyle. And I think that's I think that's where In the Heights as representation does still succeed.
Yes, absolutely. I think what In the Heights does is it depicts that demographic, that group of Latinos who are proud of their ancestry, who are proud of their heritage, who have never forgotten where they come from, where their ancestors come from, everything their ancestors have had to experience for us to have a better life, to provide a better future for us, pretty much. And I can attest, I am one of those people. My parents very much made sure that I was proud and conscious of my roots, of my ancestry, of my culture. And I kid you not, I've said this a billion times, and I'll probably say it a billion more. But in that sequence of Carnaval de Barrio, when you have all the Latin American flags, I think it's one of the most powerful moments in that movie. It's one of those powerful moments, particularly for people like myself who views the Mexican flag with such pride, with such joy, as a representation of my identity, of my culture, of my ancestry, and to see it being flown with such celebration, with such joy and pride. It filled me up with joy. It just filled me up with tears. I was emotionally moved by that, because I am that type of person. I am very proud of being from Mexican descent. I am proud every time I see that Mexican flag. So for those of us who are very much proud of where we come from, I'm pretty sure that scene meant a lot to them as well. And also to see all the Latin American flags there, flags that probably people don't know what countries they're from, either because we're ignorant of geography, or we just have never seen them in film before. It's something worth noting. And the four flags that are in the song, which is the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and Cuba, those four countries alone pretty much make up majority of the Latinos here in the United States. Although Mexico, Latinos from Mexican descent make like 60 or 63% of Latinos in the US, which is quite a vast majority of us here. But yeah, those four countries predominantly make a lot of the population in the US. And man, that number, man, it's just so powerful just to see it there, just to see the joy and the celebration and the vibrancy, and see all the Brazilian flag, the Panamanian flag, and everything. It's just beautiful, and it's such a moving sequence. And it goes to say that in that instance, I think it does nail the representation, even if it's just seeing your flag there, being hung, and just being celebrated, because all those countries, and I said it in my podcast, but that sequence is the visual representation that Latinos are not a monolith. We come from different countries, we come from different places, different cultures, different languages, and that scene certainly visually represents that.
Well, on that note, I think it's a very good positive note to end this discussion on. Before we go, Rosa, where can people find you online?
Yes. I am on every social media platform, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Rosa's Reviews.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Be sure to check out the Latinx Lens podcast. It's really quite informative and really, it's really engaging and well worth listening to. And Rosa, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for inviting me and for providing your platform for a Latino perspective. I greatly appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Rosa for joining me tonight to talk about In the Heights. It was a wonderful perspective to get her thoughts on the movie, about the controversies and the discussions on representation that are still going on. And it's a complicated thing. And the one thing I will say about it, the one thing I almost feel like I am, the one thing I can probably feel comfortable in saying about it is the important thing is when somebody feels like they're underrepresented in pop culture, in films, and just in general, is to just listen to the perspectives of those people and to take it in. And I've been very fortunate to follow Rosa on social media for about a couple of years now, and it's been really enlightening to get her perspective. And I'm glad I was able to have her on the podcast. That's it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema podcast. We've got a lot more really interesting discussions coming up with some very interesting guests, and I hope you join me at the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, as well as the sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much for joining me.